Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
It is 3 a.m. here in Jerusalem, and while the city is mostly quiet, the sky has been anything but silent over the last few nights. If you've been following the news, or if you're living through this current wave of escalations in March 2026, you have probably noticed a very specific pattern. The sirens almost always seem to go off well after midnight, usually between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. local time.
Herman Poppleberry here, and you are right, Corn. It is a pattern that is hard to ignore. Whether it is this current month of tension or looking back at the major Iranian barrage in April 2024, there is this consistent, almost religious preference for the darkness. Our housemate Daniel actually sent us a voice note about this yesterday. He was asking if this is just a psychological tactic to keep everyone exhausted, or if there is a deeper technical reason why Iran times these operations for the middle of the night. He specifically asked, why give up the visibility if you want to show off your power?
It is a great question because it feels like one of those things where the answer is probably all of the above. But I want to really dig into the technical side of this today. We are not just talking about scaring people in their pajamas, though that is certainly part of it. There is a massive game of hide-and-seek happening between Tehran and the various satellite constellations orbiting above us. To understand the 3 a.m. siren, you have to understand the orbital mechanics of the 21st century.
Exactly. And to understand the timing, you have to understand the eyes in the sky. When we talk about satellite reconnaissance, most people think of high-resolution photos, the kind you see on Google Earth. These are electro-optical satellites. They are essentially giant digital cameras in space. And just like the camera on your phone, they need light to work. They are passive sensors.
Right. They are collecting the sunlight reflecting off the Earth's surface. So, if you are Iran and you are preparing a massive launch, you have a huge logistical tail. You have to move mobile launchers out of their underground missile cities. You have to fuel liquid propellant missiles like the Imad or the Ghadar. And you have to set up your telemetry stations. All of that movement is visible to a Maxar or a Planet Lab satellite during the day. If a satellite sees a convoy of TELs, that is, transporter erector launchers, leaving a base at noon, the Israelis and the Americans have hours of lead time to prep their defenses or even conduct a preemptive strike.
And specifically, many of these imaging satellites are in what we call sun-synchronous orbits. This is a key technical detail. These satellites are designed to pass over a specific point on Earth at the same local solar time every day, usually mid-morning around 10:30 a.m. Why? Because that is when the shadows are long enough to give analysts a sense of the height and shape of objects on the ground, but the sun is high enough for clear illumination. If you know exactly when those satellites are passing overhead, and trust me, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps knows the schedule of every American and commercial imaging satellite. You can time your preparations to happen right after the window closes.
So you are saying there is a gap, a window of darkness where the most common eyes in the sky are effectively blind.
Exactly. By the time the sun goes down, you have moved your hardware into position, you have erected the missiles, and you are ready to fire. The optical satellites won't see that change until the next morning, by which time the missiles are already gone and the launchers have scurried back into their tunnels. You are denying the enemy the left of launch opportunity. That is, military speak for hitting the threat while it is still sitting on the pad.
But wait, Herman, we have talked about this before. I think it was back in episode 8081 when we were discussing high-tech spying. Don't we have satellites that can see through the dark now? What about Synthetic Aperture Radar, or SAR?
You caught me. Yes, SAR is the big exception, and it is the fastest growing sector of space intelligence. Unlike optical satellites, SAR is an active sensor. It beams its own microwave pulses down to the surface and measures the reflection that bounces back. It does not care if it is midnight or if there is a thick layer of clouds over the Persian Gulf. It sees right through it. Companies like Capella Space or ICIE are now providing high-resolution radar imagery that can see through the night.
So, if SAR can see through the dark, why does the nighttime launch still provide a benefit? Is it just a matter of resolution?
It is partly resolution, but mostly it is about the revisit rate and the data processing. Even though we have more SAR satellites in orbit now than ever before, there are still gaps. You might have a SAR satellite pass over a launch site at midnight, but the next one might not come until 4 a.m. If you launch at 2 a.m., you have found a 4-hour hole in the radar coverage. More importantly, SAR imagery is much harder to interpret quickly than a standard photo. It is not a picture, it is a map of reflectivity. It takes significant computing power and human expertise to turn those radar returns into a clear image that an analyst can use to say, hey, that is a Khyber-Shekin missile being erected on a pad. By the time the radar data is processed, analyzed, and the warning is sent down the chain, the missile might already be in the air.
That is a fascinating trade-off. You are basically gambling on the latency of the intelligence cycle. But there is a flip side to this that I find even more interesting. If you launch a massive ballistic missile at night, you are creating one of the brightest thermal signatures imaginable against a very cold background. It is like the opposite of the optical problem.
Oh, you are talking about the Space-Based Infrared System, or SBIRs. This is where the nighttime advantage actually disappears and turns into a disadvantage for the attacker in terms of being seen.
Right. For those who don't know, the United States operates these satellites in high orbits. Some in geostationary orbit 36,000 kilometers up, and others in highly elliptical orbits to cover the poles. They are specifically designed to detect the heat from a missile plume the second it leaves the ground. At night, the Earth's surface cools down. The contrast between a freezing desert floor in central Iran and a rocket motor burning at thousands of degrees is massive. It is like lighting a flare in a dark room. In the middle of a sunny day, the sun's reflection off clouds or the hot desert sand can sometimes create clutter for infrared sensors. But at 3 a.m., that launch is the brightest thing in the hemisphere.
It is exactly like that. The SBIR satellites see the launch instantly. There is no hiding the event itself, but the Iranian strategy seems to be focused on hiding the prelude. If they can hide the preparation, they deny the defenders the chance to stop the launch before it happens. Once the missile is in the air, the surprise is gone, but at least the missile is on its way. They have accepted that they will be detected at T-0, but they want to be invisible from T-6 hours to T-1 minute.
So, we have the satellite piece. Nighttime hides the prep from optical sensors, but the launch itself is a giant here. I am signaled to infrared sensors. Let's move to the ground level. Think about the weather. We are in March, and the weather in the Middle East can be unpredictable. How does the time of day interact with cloud cover and local conditions?
This is a subtle but important point. In many parts of the region, including the coastal areas of Iran and the mountains of Israel, you often see increased cloud cover or fog during the transition from day to night as the temperature drops. If you have a layer of low clouds, it complicates the terminal phase of the defense.
Explain that. Why does a cloud layer help a missile that is already falling from space at Mach 10?
Think about how a country like Israel or the United States intercepts these threats. They use a mix of radar and optical tracking. Systems like David's Sling or the Arrow 3 interceptors use high-tech seekers to find the incoming warhead. Some of those seekers are infrared or even multispectral. If the warhead is coming in through a thick cloud deck at night, it can degrade the ability of ground-based sensors or the interceptor's own onboard camera to get a visual lock in those final seconds. It adds a layer of atmospheric noise to the intercept calculation. Even a 1-second delay in a seeker locking onto a warhead can mean the difference between a hit and a miss when both objects are traveling at several kilometers per second.
And then there is the drone factor. We cannot talk about Iranian tactics without talking about the Shahed 136 drones. These things are basically slow-moving lawnmowers with wings. They take hours to reach their targets.
Right, they fly at maybe 180 kilometers per hour. If you want your drones and your ballistic missiles to arrive at the same time to saturate the air defenses, which is the goal of a saturation attack, you have to launch the drones way earlier. If the target is 1,500 kilometers away, that drone needs to launch 8 or 9 hours before impact.
Exactly. If you want a time-on-target synchronization at 3 in the morning, those drones have to be launched in the early evening, right as the sun is setting. If you launch them during the day, they would be sitting ducks. A slow-moving drone in broad daylight is an easy target for a fighter jet or even a soldier with a heavy machine gun. But at night, they are much harder to spot visually. Even with night vision and radar, a small drone with a low radar cross-section is a nightmare to track in the dark. It blends into the ground clutter.
That is a great point. The nighttime timing might actually be dictated by the drones, not the missiles. If the goal is a combined attack, you pick the time when the drones are most survivable, which is the middle of the night, and then you work backward to figure out when to fire the fast stuff, if the drones need to arrive at 3 a.m. To be sneaky, the ballistic missiles, which only take 12 minutes to get from Iran to Israel, don't get fired until 2:48 a.m.
It is a massive math problem. You have ballistic missiles that take 12 minutes, cruise missiles like the Pava that take 2 hours, and drones that take 9 hours. You want them all to hit the same square kilometer of airspace at the exact same second to overwhelm the brain of the air defense system. If you do that at noon, the defenders can see the drones coming for hours. If you do it at 3 a.m., the first time anyone sees the drones might be when they are already over the target.
And that brings us to the most human part of this, which is defender fatigue. We touched on this briefly, but it deserves a deeper look. Humans are diurnal creatures. Our brains are not at their best at 3 a.m. There is a biological phenomenon called the circadian trough, usually between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., where the body's core temperature drops and cognitive function is at its lowest point in the 24-hour cycle.
We know that all too well, Herman. But for an air defense operator, the stakes are a bit higher than a podcast script. They are staring at screens, trying to distinguish between a flock of birds, a civilian plane that's off course, and a swarm of suicide drones.
Significantly higher. There is a concept in military psychology called the OOD loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. When you are sleep deprived and operating in the dead of night, every stage of that loop slows down. Your ability to distinguish a false positive on a radar screen from a real threat is slightly degraded. Your reaction time when a siren goes off is a few seconds slower. If you are an F-35 pilot who has been on a 12-hour combat air patrol, your situational awareness at 4 a.m. is not what it was at 4 p.m.
And if you are the one being attacked, you've been living with this for weeks. You are probably not sleeping well. You are jumpy. Then the sirens go off at 3 in the morning. You have to grab your kids, run to a shelter, and sit there in the dark for an hour. The psychological toll of nighttime terror is a force multiplier. It wears down the civilian population's resolve in a way that a midday attack just doesn't. It creates a sense of omnipresent dread.
It is the pajama factor. There is something uniquely vulnerable about being woken up from a deep sleep by a siren. It bypasses the logical brain and goes straight to the amygdala. Even if the missiles are all intercepted, which they largely have been in these recent waves, the attack on the collective nervous system of the country is successful. It is a form of cognitive warfare.
I also wonder about the technical limitations of the Defender's aircraft. We know the Israeli Air Force and the United States Navy are incredibly capable at night. But is it actually harder to intercept a drone swarm in the dark?
It is. Even with the best radar in the world, a pilot flying an F-35 or an F-15 at night has less situational awareness. They are relying entirely on their sensors, like the distributed aperture system or the electro-optical targeting system. In the daytime, a pilot can often get a visual confirmation of a target to make sure it is not a civilian aircraft. At night, that identification takes longer. You are looking at green-tinted night vision screens or thermal displays. It adds cognitive load. You have to be absolutely sure before you fire a $2 million missile at something. That hesitation is what the attacker is banking on.
So, if you are Iran, you are looking at this and seeing a series of incremental advantages. You hide your prep from the most common satellites. You make your drones harder to see. You exploit the human biology of your enemy. And you synchronize your arrival times for maximum chaos. None of these things individually guarantees success, but when you stack them all up, the nighttime window becomes the obvious choice.
It is a classic example of what we talked about in episode 879, about red teaming your own plan. Iran knows its technical limitations. They know they can't win a symmetrical air war against the West, so they optimize for the environment where the West's advantages, like superior satellite imagery and pilot visibility, are slightly blunted.
Let's talk about the specific geography of this for a second. We are sitting here in Jerusalem. Tehran is about 1,500 kilometers away. The time difference is only 30 minutes. So when it is 3:30 in the morning in Tehran, it is 3 a.m. here. This isn't like a conflict between the United States and China, where the sun is up in one place and down in the other. The cloak of darkness covers both the launch site and the target simultaneously.
That is a crucial point. It means the entire kill chain, from the guy pushing the button in a bunker outside of Isfahan to the interceptor battery in the Negev desert, is operating in the same biological and environmental window. If there were a 4-hour time difference, the advantage might shift. But here, the darkness is a shared medium. It provides cover for the launch and confusion for the target at the exact same time.
So, what is the takeaway for our listeners who are trying to make sense of the headlines? Is the nighttime launch a sign of strength or a sign of necessity?
I would argue it is a sign of tactical pragmatism. It shows a deep understanding of the global surveillance architecture. Iran is essentially operating in the gaps of the international community's vision. They are using the rotation of the Earth as a form of stealth. It is a way to level the playing field against a technologically superior adversary.
It also tells us something about the future of warfare. As SAR satellite constellations grow, and as artificial intelligence makes it easier to process that radar data in real time, that nighttime window for hiding preparations is going to shrink. We are moving toward a world of persistent surveillance where it won't matter if it is day or night, or if it is cloudy or clear. Someone or something will be watching every square meter of the planet every minute of the day.
That is the nuclear dark phase concept we discussed last week in episode 883. As the ability to hide becomes harder, the pressure to move operations into even more hardened, underground, or deceptive environments increases. The night isn't as dark as it used to be. We are seeing the end of the era where you could hide a whole army just by waiting for the sun to go down.
It really isn't. And yet, for now, that 3 a.m. siren remains a staple of this conflict. It is a reminder that even in an age of high-tech sensors, the oldest cover in the world, the shadow of the Earth still carries significant military weight.
It is also worth noting that this isn't just about Iran. We see this in other conflicts too. The shock and awe campaign in Iraq started at night. The initial Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 started in the early morning hours. Nighttime is the traditional home of the strategic surprise, even if, in the modern era, the surprise is more about the when and the how rather than the if.
That is a great point. The if is usually detected by signals intelligence or human intelligence long before the first missile flies. We saw that with the US warnings before the April 2024 attack. But the when is still something you can try to mask with the clock. You can't hide the fact that you are going to attack, but you can try to make sure the attack happens when the defender is at their weakest.
Exactly. And I think we should also mention the role of civil defense in this. When we look at why these attacks often result in low casualties, it is partly the incredible tech of the Iron Dome and the Arrow system, but it is also because people are home. During the day, people are in schools, offices, and on the roads. At 3 in the morning, most people are in their houses, which often have reinforced rooms or are at least closer to a communal shelter.
That is an interesting paradox. Launching at night might be a tactical advantage for the attacker's hardware, but it might actually be a disadvantage for their lethality, because the target population is concentrated in their most protected locations. If you hit a highway at 2 p.m., you might kill more people than hitting a city at 2 a.m., where everyone is behind concrete walls.
It is a dark irony, isn't it? The very timing that is meant to cause the most psychological terror might actually be the timing that saves the most lives, simply because of where people happen to be at that hour. It suggests that the goal of these nighttime barrages is often more about political signaling and psychological impact than achieving a high body count.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but it makes perfect sense. It is another layer of the OODA loop we talked about. The defenders have a much easier time accounting for the population when everyone is in their beds. It simplifies the civil defense problem, even as it complicates the military defense problem.
So, looking forward, do we think this pattern will hold? If the current escalation continues through March 2026, should we expect the night shift to remain the standard?
Based on everything we have discussed, the satellite windows, the drone flight times, and the psychological impact, I don't see why they would change it. Unless they decide to go for a true bolt from the blue daytime attack specifically because everyone expects the night. But that would mean sacrificing all those technical advantages we just listed. It would be a huge gamble.
And in military operations of this scale, commanders generally prefer the marginal gains of technical advantages over the high risk, high reward of a total surprise. They would rather have the cover of darkness and the drone's survivability than the shock of a midday strike.
Well, Herman, I think we have thoroughly deconstructed Daniel's question. It is a mix of orbital mechanics, atmospheric physics, and good old-fashioned psychological warfare. It turns out the 3 a.m. Siren isn't just a coincidence. It is the result of a very complex set of calculations.
It is a lot to think about next time those sirens go off. Hopefully, though, our listeners will have a bit more context on what is happening above their heads while they are waiting in the shelter. Understanding the why doesn't make the siren any quieter, but it does make the situation feel a bit more predictable.
Absolutely. Knowledge is its own kind of shield. Before we wrap up, I want to remind everyone that if you are finding these deep dives helpful, please take a moment to leave us a review on your podcast app or over on Spotify. It really does help other people find the show, and we appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that.
It really does. And if you want to get in touch with us, or if you have a weird prompt of your own that you want us to tackle, you can find the contact form and our full archive of over 800 episodes at our website, myweirdprompts.com. We are also available on Spotify, of course.
Thanks to Daniel for the prompt that kept us up tonight. Not that we were sleeping much anyway. This has been My Weird Prompts. I am Corn.
And I am Herman Poppleberry. Stay curious and stay safe.
We will see you in the next one. Until then, keep asking those questions.
Good night or good morning wherever you are. This has been a human-AI collaboration from Jerusalem. Take care, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox Turbo.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.